So welcome to another edition of the Influence Global podcast. And I'm super delighted to have my very good friend, Nisarg Shah, who is the CEO and founder of Affable. We've been on a conference recently together talking about all things influencer marketing, and I was very impressed by some of the insights, particularly around data that he was sharing. So we're going to talk about a number of things on this half-hour podcast. But anyway, welcome, Nisarg, and lovely to see you on the show.
Thanks a lot, Gordon, for having me here. I've been a big follower of your podcast, of your content, your book, and I'm excited to be here and share some of our thoughts on what a data-driven influencer marketing program looks like and what's to come in the next coming years.
Great, sounds super. And before we do that, though, just tell everybody a little bit about you and how you got into the space.
Sure thing. So I'm Nisarg. I'm one of the co-founders of Affable.ai. We started Affable back in 2018 in Singapore, where the influencer marketing industry in Asia was still ramping up. People were spending millions of dollars on influencers without having their cockpit view of the ROI, of the performance, of comparing it against other channels. And when we set out to build a program to focus on data, we got a massive adoption from some of the top brands and agencies there. Me and my co-founder, we both come from the engineering world. So we've taken an engineering view of the influencer marketing space. We're the outsiders to the industry, as we typically are called, but that gives us a big benefit of looking at this industry from a different lens of data rather than just followers and likes and relationships. So that got us here. 5 years in, we work with more than 100 different brands and agencies. Some of the top brands globally use Affable's platform to run their entire influencer strategy. It's the operating system behind their entire influencer stack that helps them manage the end-to-end influencer marketing process.
Yeah, amazing. Well done on your achievement so far. So you mentioned data, and I mean, as marketeers, it's such an important part of what they do in terms of showing ROI, but also within the sort of internal selling, because so often it's the bean counters of the finance and commercial teams that need to understand the value that influencer marketing can provide for their business. And when they've got far better data sets and success criteria, of course, it makes that job a hell of a lot easier, doesn't it?
Oh, for sure. The finance department, the director of marketing, the CXOs, they want data because influencer marketing is kind of in the spectrum of just reach-based marketing versus performance marketing. It's always in the middle. It's tussling between, do you want brand awareness or do you want a data-driven ROI program? And influencer marketing's benefit is that it gives you both. But as budgets scale, that's where the question arises, what is the ROI? If you want to spend $10,000 a year on a campaign, sure, most of the brands would have that kind of a budget to experiment with it without focusing on ROI then. But as you scale it to 100,000, $1 million, a $10 million program, you really want to get the ROI metrics out of it. And that's where we saw the biggest challenge was with brands who had an established influencer program that they wanted to scale. Not so much with brands who are experimenting or doing it for the first time.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So what sort of data, for those people that are perhaps not aware, what sort of data can we get out of an influencer program?
So there is data across the entire spectrum of influencer marketing strategy. So let's start with discovery. When you want to identify the right influencers, if you don't use data, what you're doing is you're manually checking Instagram profiles, looking at content, or a friend told you about an influencer who's big or growing, and then you reach out to them. It's not backed by how many of the followers are real or fake. So the data in discovery could include real followers, audience demographics, other followers even in your target demographic or not. The recent engagement rates, if someone has 100,000 followers, are they getting 10,000 engagement, likes or comments, or are they getting 100 likes and comments? And for someone with 100,000 followers, these two metrics are very important because it shows how engaged their audiences are with them. Also, some of the qualitative data points include how recently have they worked with competitors? What are the kind of competitors they worked with? If they talk about your brand, how many other brands have they spoken about in the last 7 days, 30 days, 90 days? All of this influences your ROI eventually. So that's the discovery part. In the outreach part, you want to track and measure how many influencers you've reached out to, how many of them have responded, how many of them have participated in your program. So what's your conversion rate there? And eventually, once the campaign goes live, there are two kinds of metrics that marketers should focus on. One is the performance metric, sales, who's driving the most sales, what is the amount and volume of sales driven, how much time does it take? And second is reach, impressions, media value that influencers, and brand awareness that they can drive for you. So it's a very long answer, but there is data across the entire spectrum. And we are very passionate about it, on how you could leverage data from finding to managing to measuring influencers.
Yeah, no, indeed. And I think you mentioned sort of fake followers as well. That's a big issue that brands have, is knowing who are the right people that they can trust. I mean, although I don't like to use the word media buy, but in a way they are, because
Right.
it's coming out of the same budget, isn't it? And they need to know what value they're getting and what's their available audience. One of the things I was just going to ask you as well is the sort of location base. So if you've got, for example, you're opening a restaurant, let's just say in London, and you want to bring an influencer along, you want to make sure that, I guess, that a big percentage of those followers are based in London or in surrounding areas, as opposed to based in America or somewhere else, because the chances of them coming to a London-based launch of a restaurant is going to be small. And a brand wouldn't necessarily know that from an influencer unless they were to share their insights. And why would they necessarily do that before they've even spoken to them? They may not, unless they've got a media deck. But a program and platform like yours would be super helpful in being able to analyze that.
That's right. And that's very spot on. More and more brand marketers are now very careful about their influencer selection. So we're already seeing the change coming in the industry, which is great. It took some time. We had to do a lot of awareness programs, and folks like you who are vouching for data-driven influencer programs, who are educating the masses, speaking at these big events, really helps drive this message. And as you mentioned, a restaurant in London, or for that matter, a brand that is only selling in Europe, when they work with influencers, and this typically happens with bigger influencers, where their followers are distributed all across the world at no fault of theirs. They're just famous everywhere. Yeah. But when you are evaluating between a global influencer versus a local influencer, depending on the objective of your program, if your objective is to run sales, you want to focus on the local because you only sell locally. Or if your objective is to invite them to a restaurant, again, local makes sense. But sometimes a global influencer also matters when you want to run a brand awareness program. And for a big brand like, let's say, Pepsi, they sell all over the world. In that case, the location of the followers may not be as relevant. But for brands that are very localized, yes. And just touching back on the point of fake followers, the providers of these fake followers have become so intelligent that for many cases, these followers do not come from outside the geography. So if you were to just look at the follower location, you may not be able to tell if they're fake or not. And this has happened over a period of time. The providers have become smart and intelligent. What we use is machine learning, where we can detect the behavior of a follower, compare it with what we know is the behavior of a fake follower, and then find some match there.
Yeah, no, that makes absolute sense, doesn't it? Just on the global campaign idea, and you're absolutely right, there are going to be sort of big influencers that are famous sort of the world over. But I think one of the benefits that influencer marketing has is being able to run campaigns with localized influencers. I've just come back from Dubai, for example. So, being able to use an American organization, a brand may want to have, a London-based influencer, a Dubai-based influencer, and maybe one in Beijing or something, because there's going to be different themes or even different types of content, and how important is that in terms of connecting with a brand, globally?
A lot of times brands work with global influencers that are typically macro or celebrities to create that association. Now, these are ambassadors of the brand. As we discussed just briefly before, for many cases, localized makes sense. And most cases, when you're talking about influencer marketing or micro influencer marketing, it makes sense to work with localized influencers. But any program, typically for a brand that's spending $1 million+ on influencers, they would have a program where during the year, they would still engage some macro or celebrity to drive the global association for the brand. Now, with FIFA World Cup, you'd see a lot of celebrities being engaged by brands, talking about the brand in the context of the World Cup. You would also notice people are traveling. A lot of brands would take a group of influencers and make them travel to somewhere else. Now, this group is carefully chosen, diverse group of influencers that do not have an overlapping follower base, because you want to reach the maximum number of followers and then take them somewhere so that they are constantly creating content for the brand. In the world which is now so connected, it is extremely important to run these global campaigns as well if you have the budget. But if your budget is limited, if you're a new brand, if you are experimenting and starting to scale your program, we'd still advise to focus on your micro group of influencers that have a localized impact to your target audience, wherever that might be.
Yeah, no, indeed. I mean, and also trying to find, just going back to sort of your platform, do you manage influencers on the whole from end to end, or how does that work?
So it does help manage each influencer end to end, and it helps you find influencers globally as well, as long as they're public profiles. One caveat here is we try to infer as much information as we can from our end using information like the profile pictures, the biography, etc. We run machine learning models, textual analysis, image analysis to detect what is the kind of content this influencer is uploading so that we can do the right match. But once you've shortlisted the influencers, you can reach out to them, you can send them products. We would integrate with a Shopify store or another e-commerce backend to help you facilitate the entire transaction between the influencer and then rolling it back to measurement and payment as well.
Yeah, so payment, and that's interesting, isn't it? So in your opinion, do most influencers get paid up front before they do the work? Or, because I know I was speaking to somebody recently about there is particularly in certain sectors, there's a lot of talk about where brands have not been so diligent in the way that they've paid influencers. And I always think, well, you don't want to be messing up an influencer that's got a big following, because they're going to be talking to other people about it and your brand could be tarnished appropriately. So having that strong relationship with an influencer is so important, isn't it?
It is. And you mentioned you don't want to mess it up with a big influencer. I would say you don't want to mess it up with any influencer.
Any influencer, yeah, of course.
The industry is so tight. These influencers have WhatsApp groups, they have Telegram chats, they have Instagram groups where they're constantly messaging each other of what they see in the industry. So if a brand is doing well, if they're paying well, then that also gets circulated across the entire industry of these well-connected influencers. Same thing. If a brand, let's say, does not pay on time, or there are delays, they withhold payments, then that is also circulated, and it starts micro influencer level, right? To go back to the nature of payment, we have seen a mix of both. Upfront typically works for influencers of certain size, let's say 20,000, 25, 30,000 followers and above. These are the influencers who, some of them start asking for upfront payment, especially when there is a lot of demand for their content.
Right.
For others, we've seen either a product barter or a commission-based payment. So in many cases, what a brand would do is they would send a product to the influencer and say, hey, influencer, no obligation. We are sending it to you. If you like it, if you use it, feel free to review it. If you do, we'll give you a percentage commission for any sale that you drive. And this is like a mass approach that many brands take. Some other brands would say, hey, influencer, I'm going to pay you $100 fixed to talk about the brand. But if you do drive sales, we also pay you a commission on top of it.
Yeah.
Now,
So
influencers, it's kind of like a hybrid, but many times influencers want a fixed pay because they cannot control the variable. They cannot control what sales might be driven, or if the message lands or not.
And if I'm honest, I'm a fan of that. I'm a fan of somebody it has created content myself for various brands and things like that. And it takes time. And I think sometimes brands underestimate that they can't just drop a hat. It's just like putting like a selfie or a picture and then sharing it. No, I mean the best influencers really think about the content, the quality of it, and often a location. If you think about location, they've got to go out and find somewhere. They may also have to have a friend that takes the photography and video for them. They can't always do it all of themselves. So there is quite a lot that can be involved in this, and just creating content and making sure that there is, the right theme and messaging, because it's an important point to mention, isn't it? Really,
right. I like to say this one thing that I read somewhere, which is influencers are content creators first. They are influencers because they create amazing content. So as a brand, when you're working with an influencer, even if it does not drive sales that you had expected, you now have an asset. You have a content that you could reuse on your paid campaigns, and you have an association with this influencer who's at least known within the circle of, let's say, 50,000 followers that now associate you. So even if the followers are not going to buy something today, you've still achieved a lot, and you should pay for that.
Absolutely
Influencers.
right. Well, you wouldn't go and watch a TV ad or expect to have a magazine advertising. Again, there's no guarantee that you would get any purchases from that. You wouldn't expect to say, "Can I have this advert for nothing?" Would you? So I really think influencers in many cases should be paid for the content that they create. But we're also seeing, aren't we, Nisarg, lots of paid media amplifying that influencer content so that it gets to a big and wider audience.
That's true. Whitelisting is a very good tactic to reach more people, especially people that, as a brand, I want to target, which the influencer may not necessarily be able to target. Now, going back to our point about location, let's say a restaurant or a brand which is opening a store in London, they work with 10 influencers in London, they're able to get some reach there. But the real value is to take that content, run paid ads against it, because now you can actually target exactly who should see that ad. So if you want to target, let's say, moms interested in fashion who are based in London, the programmatic behavior of ad platforms allow you to use this content targeting them. And when the followers see this ad, the ad is not from the brand. The ad appears from the influencer.
Yeah.
So it's a win-win. The brand gets a very high targeted reach. The brand does not need to use a content agency to create that content. And for the influencer, they get more reach on their content, maybe a few more followers on the content as well.
Well, indeed, that's a really good point, because I think when you're collaborating with an influencer, it's not just the paid part of this, isn't it? Because what they want is great content that is going to nourish and add value to their audience. But if they can, in the meantime, benefit by the fact that the brand has put some paid media behind it, and therefore more of their audience get to see their content, then that's going to be good for them as well, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. And we are actually seeing that more and more brands who understand the paid media landscape and understand how whitelisting works are experimenting with it. Social channels themselves are making it easier. Facebook has ad manager with the whitelisting, which is very easily baked into it. TikTok is doing something similar where you could boost content through TikTok Spark ads. So as this becomes more relevant, we believe that in 2023, there will be more paid amplification of influencer content.
And do you see, I mean, everybody's talking at the moment about e-commerce being the big driver of change in 2023. We've already seen it this year with creators having their own brands. So they're not necessarily just promoting other people's, but now actually having their own stores. What, from your point of view, as somebody heavily involved in the data, how important do you think influencer with their own Shopify channels is going to change the landscape?
Influencers, we are seeing typically now the big influencers launching their own brands. For example, the bigger YouTubers, Mr. Beast has a bunch of his own brands now. Some of the big fashion influencers on Instagram, beauty influencers are launching their own skincare lines. We believe that this will go down to micro influencers as well.
Absolutely.
The brands would start smaller because of the smaller reach that these influencers have, but it will grow from there. Second, we see that there will be a lot of collaboration between influencers because 2 micro or 3 micro influencers can come together and start a brand and use the joint forces of the combined followers rather than having to grow that brand organically. So that's going to happen. And finally, influencer generated commerce will actually become a thing where brands who engage with influencers for their collaboration purposes will focus a lot more on commerce, on a lot more on driving sales rather than just reach. We're already seeing the shift. Let's say 5 years ago, more brands were focused on reach through influencers. In 2022, there has been a lot more focus on sales, and the social channels are being smart about it. Instagram Shop, TikTok shopping, YouTube shopping, native integrations with Shopify, that will expand beyond Shopify to Magento, Salesforce Commerce Cloud, etc. And this industry of influencer-generated commerce will become very seamless. Back in 2017, when we started, we had an hypothesis where people will shop.
Stop.
More on social channels while
Wait a
scrolling through the
second.
feed.
Did you get that?
I think
We froze.
we froze for a couple of seconds, like 10, 15 seconds, I guess.
Yeah, I don't know what happened there. Don't worry, we can where did we get to? We stop and then you actually froze, or I mean I probably froze in your whatever.
So yeah, I'll just say that again, right? We believe that influencer generated commerce could be very important new trend in 2023. Influencers launching their own brands is going to happen. More and more micro influencers will come together and launch brands. But when a brand is approaching an influencer, hey, you got it. I think we froze.
Yeah, I don't know what's happened. Is it my internet or yours? Hello.
Hello. Hey, I think we're back now.
Are we? Yeah, I don't know what happened there. I mean, I got quite a bit of that. Is it all right? Do you reckon? Or is it my internet or yours?
I am not sure, honestly. Did you get any message from Zoom saying network unstable?
No, but I have had those before, so it could be.
Okay, I think we're fine now. So yeah. I think we'll have to edit this out, but I'll just wrap up the thought so there is a continuity. Influencer generated commerce will become a thing in 2023 beyond just more and more influencers launching their own brands. Yes, there will be more micro influencers launching brands as well, but these brands who are engaging influencers today will put a lot of emphasis on driving commerce, driving sales and performance, measurable sales and performance, rather than just reach and engagement. The social channels are enabling this. The social channels are integrating with Shopify already, and they're going to extend those integrations to help with these influencer-generated commerce measurements.
Yeah, no, great, super. Well, I have to say, Nisarg, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you today, and well done on your achievements on Affable. It sounds like you're heading in the right direction, and all the best for the future. And as I say, thanks again for joining us on the Influence Global podcast.
Thank you so much, Gordon, for having me. I hope there's some valuable nuggets here for the listeners. And if the listeners would want to follow up on this, discuss any ideas, I'm more than happy to keep talking about influencer marketing and the future of it. Find me on LinkedIn or Twitter and drop me a note, and I'd love to connect with them and discuss more. But appreciate all the work you do for the influencer marketing industry. Big fan and follower here. You are an influencer yourself for this world of influencer marketing. So I'm looking forward to what's next in your content roadmap as well.
Great. Oh, thank you so much.